Welcome back to the first afternoon session of the Symposium on Communication for Social Justice in the Digital Age. We welcome you again, and of course, as always, we have great things ahead. As always, you can also listen to the interpretation by clicking on the command bar. You can choose between German translation, English, French, and Spanish. Also, you're most welcome to put questions in the chat if you have them, both on Zoom and on YouTube. This session will be focusing on experiences of people, on best practice, and on ways on how to claim the digital space for all of us and how to improve the conditions. First thing we will do today will be an editorial project which was prepared before the symposium. My colleague will be explaining a bit more about it shortly. And in the second part of this session, we will have people who have been organizing the Global Youth Faith events sharing their experience with us. And I think we can all agree how excited we are for all of these testimonials. But now, I would like to hand over to Rhoda Mfande from WCC Communications Department to tell a bit about the editorial project.
Many thanks for that, Christiane. Just to verify, my name is Rhoda Moyo Mpande. It was my previous name before I got married. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all those present here today and those who will be watching the recording. I am a young Australian who is currently based in Switzerland, living with my husband and our son who just turned 1 month ago and is also starting to get very curious about digital devices around him. I am currently working at the World Council of Churches in the communication department. I would like to give you a brief insight on how young people from WCC and WSCF collaborated to deliver an editorial project, as Christiane mentioned, and it was based on intergenerational interviews on digital justice as part of the youth participation to this international symposium. When speaking about social justice in a digital age, the first impressions can change a lot depending on age, location, gender, religion, just to mention a few. The interviews aimed to give visibility to these differences and map some of the most tricky points. The process started beginning of the year, and the team composed of 5 people under the age of 35 from WCC and WSCF was created. And the team was thinking about questions that match the priorities of the days of the symposium, which is pretty much digital justice, public space, vision for the future. Questions around these 3 topics were also created, having 3 questions under each of the topics. By selecting the interviewees, the above mentioned balances and demographics were kept in mind. And I just want to also extend my gratitude to young people from WCC, namely Joy Eva Boho, and Gregoire de Fombel, and young people from WSCF, Christiane herself, and Katya Potapenko, who contributed to the project by reaching out to different networks just to see who is willing and open to be interviewed on this topic of digital justice. After collecting the interviews, 2 authors turned the interviews into different formats. We went for news features, Q&As, and blog posts. And we just also want to say many thanks to Peter Kenny and Susan Kim, who were our 2 authors who made the interviews live and available for us. We know that not all relevant positions are visible, but this might be a good starting point to understand that perspectives are always personal and need to be critically reflected. We ensured that we respected the wishes of the interviewees, such as keeping their identity anonymous or not using their photos. And we also offered the option to pre-record statements, having online interviews which were recorded, which allowed us to actually include a young man living with disability to also participate. And others preferred to submit written responses to the questions. We also experienced people self-silencing or being silenced even after the interview was completed. And this in itself shows the urgency of the topic. Overall, as you can see, we wanted to be inclusive in our approach and delivery of this part of the symposium. To conclude, we have published 7 interviews from the following regions: Africa, the Caribbean, Europe, the Pacific, and Middle East. The age range is between 25 years to 70 years so that we can get an intergenerational contrast on the topic across the range. The interviews are available on the WCC website, and they are also available in Spanish, German, French, and English. And I would urge you all to take a moment, have a read through them, to just have an insight of what digital justice vision for the future and public space looks like from the different experiences and perspectives of our interviewers who come from different backgrounds and regions. Many thanks for listening today.
Thank you, Rhoda. Yes, this is exactly what we will do. Now we will be reading the interviews, not all together. I'm not going to read them out loud, don't worry. But we have prepared a Padlet for you, summing up all the interviews so that you don't have to click through all the articles published around the symposium. You can find the link to the Padlet in the chat. And we do invite you to read through the articles. Please share your comments, share your thoughts, if you have experience in similar contexts as the people that we have been speaking to. If you have additional comments, if you experience things in a very different way, please share your insights by commenting in the Padlet. You can also comment on comments, and of course, you will also have the chance to speak now in this Zoom call. If you are on YouTube, you can, of course, use the Padlet as well. You won't be able to speak with us, but you will be able to contribute in there. And we are looking forward to having some interactive discussion. Just to let you know, you may leave your name in your comments, but you don't have to. So this can also be your chance to speak up without showing your identity if you don't feel comfortable, or also if your internet connection isn't stable enough to speak up in a meeting. This can be your chance to share with us what you feel and how you experience the question of digital justice in all its facets. I hope you can all start reading now, and while you're reading and writing, I can share some of the insights and some of the things that we have been learning through these interview series, which are super interesting. So I would recommend you reading all of them. You can also read them multiple times. So we've been speaking about things like the need for a digital court, how rules could look for a shared living together and for community, which is also found digitally. You can find more information on that in the article featuring Katja Potapenko. Furthermore, we have been hearing about censorship and about people being on purpose left behind and silenced, about accessibility, about all different levels of accessibility, because it's not just done by having an access to the internet and the equipment, the technical equipment. These are the first steps, but this is not the end of the story. Furthermore, we learned through the interviews about the need for education and also of the role that church can have in advocating and claiming for guidance through the Holy Spirit, so a theological approach. We also learned about very shocking stories about activists being fooled by the digital methodology and the digital tools which they used, and about autocratic systems which limit human rights on all levels of life. Furthermore, we heard about the danger of surveillance. And we learned about the access for women and children to digital tools and the digital world. Furthermore, we had to read about the effects that the digital world can have on mental health. Also, we've been hearing stories about the church approaching the new world with a loving attitude and how that could look. This project is supposed to be the first step in a long journey leading to more understanding, as Rhoda was explaining, between the different generations and between people of different educational backgrounds and also cultural backgrounds. So please use this moment to type in your own perspective. Leave a comment. How do you feel? Is there someone you would identify with or someone you would love to meet and have a chat about? This Padlet is supposed to sum up many different opinions, not all of them, that's not possible probably, but to give an overview, also how to start the conversation, because in this symposium as well as in everyday life, we all have very different backgrounds and very different approaches to the topic and very different topics that concern us most. So please use the Padlet now and maybe also in the break after this session to leave your comments and share with us what you think. We received some first comments saying about the story of Aziz that it's very inspiring. And I think I can add that for all other articles as well. As the team that was working on that project, we also want to thank again everybody who was willing to speak with us or to send us their contributions, who was raising their voices. And we are very happy to have published such a big amount of articles, of interviews, of testimonials. We have received another comment on the article about Dr. Salter Sterling, the oldest participant. He's 84, so he has experienced the entire development of the digital age, I would say. It says, love his comment on not to change human nature just because we have a digital revolution. Let me go back to the Zoom meeting and see if there's someone who would like to speak up and who would like to explain their point of view a bit to us. We received a comment that it would be nice to have a short video that could be shared on social media channels and could lead to a landing page with the interviews as resource material. And this is definitely a good idea. We can have a look at it and see how to protect the personality rights of our participants in these interviews, and how to ensure that everybody is being safe and comfortable with it. But it's definitely something we can consider. Thank you for that comment. We have received more comments on the feature about Samsung. It says, I love to see the inclusivity of these interviews and to also see digital justice through Samsung's lens. Another comment says, access and accessibility has infrastructures and resource elements, but we should never forget the specific needs of people with disabilities. And I find this very, very interesting because also the social media offers lots of tools, but not enough probably. And it's always good to be reminded that accessibility has very different lenses and that we should try to have a holistic view on that. All right. I would like to ask you to continue commenting and reading in the next break, but for us now here live to move a bit on, because we have amazing people with us in this meeting. We have the coordinating project team of the Global Youth Faith event with us today. And this team consists of Christina Biere from the Evangelical Church of Westphalia in Germany, and Annika Hunecke from the same church, but as well Cecilia Jambuani from Papua, and Edward Nondo from Zambia, and also Eraste Rukera from Rwanda. And I would love to hand over to you now to hear about your journey, about the Global Youth Faith event, and what we can all take from that once-in-a-lifetime experience, I would call it.
in point now that is characterized by a 1 week long digital and in some cases non-digital interactions of 260 participants that had to make it possible to have an inter-church youth encounter. And this was represented by 9 churches from 9 member countries. And these countries are Namibia, Zambia, Germany, Sri Lanka, England, West Papua, Kenya, Indonesia, and Rwanda. The Global Youth Faith event was organized by an international preparatory team of 32 skilled people, among others, the social workers, pastors, youth workers, ecumenical workers, as well as volunteers. And this was through regular planning Zoom sessions that were conducted between December 2020 and July 2021. And these took the form of plenary and working groups to create the activities that put together a diverse program with art, music, prayer, Bible study, political topics, and digital worship. And of course, with a lot of WhatsApp communication. I want to also say that a pertinent question that arises at this point in time is why the Global Youth Faith event? Why Jive? Next slide, please.
Thank you for the introduction. To respond to the question why Global Youth Faith Event 2021, we can start from the experience we shared together. At the beginning of our journey, we asked how could we organize an international youth encounter during the pandemic. We shared experience and work together, and the joint consideration led us to realize that young people in different countries and churches are facing similar challenges due to the COVID-19 and its consequences. Among those challenges, we can mention too little contact with other young adults because of different lockdowns. Too little education. You remember that in that time, schools were closed. Too little spiritual guidance. Also, you remember that in that time, the churches were closed. And also, we can mention too little hope for one's personal future. After gathering those challenges, we guessed that those common challenges would be a particular good opportunity for mutual learning in a digital space and to foster empathy and empowerment among young who were in that situation. From that, we try to build a structure which has helped us to reach our objectives. Thank you.
Yeah, next slide, please. So we can talk a lot about it, but it's better to show to you. And fortunately, we had in our preparation team a very skilled video cutter, namely Louis Purba, who did a best of film that we would like to share with you and to take you a little bit with us in the Jive spirit. Enjoy.
We are connected, all of us. Let's make use of this platform during these 7 days, and then let's exhaust every energy we have as young people to empower each other, to encourage each other, to motivate each other, to share as much as we can. Let's enjoy our week as young people. Happy Global Youth Faith Event.
It's about sharing our faith, coming together in COVID times.
And fashions of the day. Some friends also like to write poetry and make dance videos. And they can also post the videos on the Padlets, and everyone can put some comments, put their thoughts on the Padlets. Above all, we all can put our comments and share on our thoughts on every post posted as we do on Facebook. Only the Padlet is more official, and I think this is good for an international activities. At Zooms, we can meet online and be in small groups to discuss God's word from the Bible and participate in interesting workshops such as climate protection, fair fashions, and polyphonic digital singing. And the opening and closing events are also done via Zoom. It was amazing. Our Indonesian team also make some music video and post it on the Padlet. And we also got chance to listen to it together again at the closing worship ceremony. All those activities are supported by the WhatsApp groups that provide us information about what activities we have done and what kind of activities that we need to do for the next day. Of course, we can talk to each other through WhatsApp group as well. In the situations of COVID-19 pandemic, I got chance to do all the activities of the Global Youth Faith event. It makes me happy, and for me, this is an opportunity for healing for the students like me who are studying from home at that time. And it helps me to talk to other people outside of the community. Thank you so much. Next slide, please.
Please open your mic, Edward, and start again.
Thank you. What was more significant to this digital infrastructure was also what we tried to share on how to do videos to the participants. We had tutorials. There were also explanations just to ensure that everybody that was participating was able to use these tools. But perhaps the overarching question here, in terms of the issue of security and the safe spaces in the web, is that how secure was Jive? How secure was the Global Faith Youth event? Of course, it is quite certain for us that there were lessons that were drawn on the communication for social justice. Next slide, please.
Thank you. Through our journey, we ran a lot of things, but now I will try to focus on social justice. We learned that through internet, we can build a community, we can put people together, we can link people from one area to another. And this way of linking people is also less environmental destructive, because in normal way we use to transport means, and now we walk at the same area without moving. Second, we find that this tool reduce barriers. You see, when you apply for visa, when you are looking for air ticket, those can be also barriers that reduce the participation. But here we give a link, and when someone is with his tool, he can join easily. We learn also that it is a real touching encounter, because you exchange as you are in the same room. Even we find this is advantages, but we find that there is also some difficulty, like to increase the participation, because to use this tool require to have means, require to have tools like computer, like phone, like also have internet connection. We try to analyze those barriers and try to find the solutions. For example, lack of internet access and the high price, we try to contribute to help those who didn't have internet bundles, and they buy for them, and they try to join the group. About the lack of technical infrastructure, yeah, we made this challenge. We didn't find enough to solve it. Only what we have is to advocate to advocate that different intervene, different government, different organization can also contribute to put in place the infrastructures that can help people to have access, to have equal right to digital space. We find also there is a lack of skills. Through our Global Youth Faith event, we learn from each other how to use them, and we find that also it has increased the participation, also the sharing of knowledge. And we met many challenges, and what we find can be done is to advocate in order we improve infrastructures and also the accessibility of different people, like the marginalized people, like poor, like people with disability, because there is no tools that can help them to access to digital space. Thank you. We can move for the following slide.
Yeah, all in all, regarding the feedback of our participants and our experience in the international preparation team, we can say Jive really was a success. And for us, the key success factor is that we really planned from the beginning on in an international team. I just checked my calendar and saw that from the beginning of the planning process on, I had almost every second week at least one Jive meeting in a working group. So we had like the plenary meeting where I think it was 32 members of the preparation team, where we all met to discuss everything, and we had small working groups. For example, I was part of the spirituality group, and especially in those small working groups, we took really time to discuss things. And that gave us the opportunity to get to know each other very well. And everything that was discussed was then brought up to the plenary meeting. And that enabled us as international preparation team to really identify challenges and barriers and finding solutions together. And as well, because we were such a big international preparation team, we had a lot of skills and a lot of creative ideas that we could bring in. And that made the whole program the way it was. So I would say, as an international preparation team, we learned together how to design and how to implement global programs and form a community on local level by hybrid forms of participation. Because as you could see, we really thought of a design where people can meet in their context the way it was possible at that time due to lockdown situations. And at the same time, all could come together in digital space. And that really was special for us and a new thing. And we really learned together how this can work and what we need to take care of when we organize such programs. Next slide.
We would like to give thanks to God for enabling us to work together and learn so much, to all the participants, which were crucial for the contributions to this topic and make it really felt it with life and spirit and encouragement. And of course, to you, to the organizers of the symposium, for the opportunity to present here today. And we hope that you're still with us, all the participants, If so, you could maybe give us a sign, use the reaction buttons maybe as we come to the end of the presentation. And we would really like to hear from you. What does make sense to you about the project? What not? What kind of questions do you have? Or maybe you have ideas how this program could be improved. Maybe it doesn't seem to be so special, or maybe it does. What do you take with you from this presentation? And maybe you have an idea how we could assist with the material or the things we have prepared, the experiences. So yeah, I think we are open for oral discussion. So please raise your digital hand. You find the digital hand in the reaction, under the reactions. And yeah, here our last page of the presentation, the pictures different participants took at different times in their contexts and then made up a collage. And you find our names and some email addresses if you would like to contact us afterwards. And I think I hand over to Christiane for moderation of the discussion, right?
Thank you. Thank you so much for your presentation. I find it very inspiring. I hope you at home have the same feeling. I have already received one first question, and maybe we can collect some more, both in the chat and also, as Christina mentioned, please feel free to raise your hand and speak up if you wish. If you're joining us later on or on YouTube, please use the chat and I will be asking for you. The first question I've received is that we have heard quite a lot about the discussion on whether the digital space is actually space for real interaction and whether this can really touch a soul and whether the person behind the screen is visible. What experience did you have in your project? Maybe you could just raise your hand so I know whom to hand over to if you would like to answer.
Well, I can start, others can add. I mean, for example, we had worship music sessions by Zoom. Of course, participants had to mute their microphones, but if you have a skilled person, a musician who's skilled in the didactics of music workshops digitalized, then it works. So you have musicians in front of their cameras, their computers, and people can dance and have worship, and there are many forms of sharing the text and the lyrics, and even for the service that could happen. And of course, music is touching, and I heard it a lot of times that when we discussed, whether digital worship is possible, and people were complaining that it's not possible to sing, and we had an experience that it is still possible to sing and to be touched by music and to celebrate a worship, a total worship where nothing is really missing.
Thank you. Maybe I can hand over to Cecilia, because you were introducing all the materials and all the tools that you've been using. Did you also have the feeling that nothing got lost?
Yes, I have this kind of feelings that after we are doing the Global Youth Faith event activities, I feel lonely but more happier than before, because I cannot get chance to meet with all my friends from different countries back again and discuss about those topics that has been preparing for us during the Global Youth Faith event. So it was such an amazing experience for join with the Global Youth Faith event, and such as amazing experience as well to learn those digital infrastructure as a Padlet and Zoom meeting and WhatsApp groups. And now we can use it well. We can use it well to do good things like what the Global Youth Faith event did. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Cecilia. Thank you for sharing that. I have received another question, which is, how did you deal in practice with the cost of data? That's something you mentioned, Erasto. Maybe you would like to comment on that? Also, everyone else is welcome to do so.
Yeah, thank you. As I told you, to be more inclusive, it required that people can have access to internet, and we try to calculate the time that people will spend on internet, and try to make an average of different price, and it means that we ask a different country to give the price of internet in the country, and we put those prices together and contribute to each country, and the country also try to share the money available with the participate. It means that we collect data from different countries and try to work based on those data. Thank you. I don't get if you understand what I mean. I wanted to say that as the preparation team, we asked different countries who will participate about the cost of internet regarding to the time we need to spend in our Global Faith event, and we pay according those prices. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That completely makes sense, but sounds like a lot of math for you. What a great job you have done in doing that. My next question is directed to Edward, and it's about the question of security and making it a safe space, because this is something you have mentioned. Is there something you would do differently in the next Global Youth Faith event?
Thank you. Obviously, it still remains a big question for all of us. And this is the more reason we chose to come up here and be part of this symposium. Because I think in many countries, including our own, we've seen how that we don't seem to have safe spaces in the web. And this is what we've seen as a result of the hackings that we see around. And I think that for JIFE, what we're not too sure is whether we were quite secure in all that we did, or there was an element of porosity somewhere in terms of infiltrating in all that we were doing. Obviously, that applies the different areas where we operate from. I tend to think that unless there's a way we can secure the webs in which we actually operate, we were also susceptible for that. I think it's something that we all need to hear, to be assisted on how best we could have kept the Jive projects together without any security risks around us. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think the security risk is quite a big topic in many different aspects. In my local student Christian movement, we have experienced Zoom bombing, for example, and then we, of course, have the data stealing issue. And is a faith space a safe space online? Another question that I have, or that has been sent to me, is when it comes to the forming of the international team, how did you do that? How did you decide whom to include? Because you said you were 32 people. That's quite a lot from 9 different churches and countries, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe you could share a bit more about that. Maybe Annika, if you don't mind.
Working with partnerships that already existed. So we had congregations from the Protestant Church of Westphalia who were in contact with other congregations and had already youth programs before. And that was like our entry point to say, okay, let's use those relationships that we already have and ask all if they want to join, if this would be an option to create something in digital space. And then I would say, like we had in the first meeting, maybe we were like 10 people, and everyone was starting to think about, okay, who could be a person that can help us with this program? And so many more people joined in. For example, I remember from Kenya, we had some people who were professionals in counseling, and we had the feeling, yeah, we need in those difficult times, we need experts in counseling. So they brought in their team, and that is how it grew up to 32 people, 32 experts, and yeah, that was perfect. And Edward wants to add.
Oh, Annika, thank you, Annika. I add that we also had in mind a cross representation around the globe, such that each time we needed to look at different aspects of representation, we had to look at different regions in the world. For example, we would look at the fact that if we are looking at Europe, we would actually make sure that on that 32-member team, we needed somebody to represent Europe. If we're looking at Central Africa or Africa generally, we also needed that. So from regions, that trickled now down to countries, whereby each member church in that country will be able to cast the net wide in terms of looking at the different age groups and the different people coming with different backgrounds and skills. And we would actually have them like nominated on this team, because there was need to ensure that there was some kind of an intergenerational perspective in terms of age range. We could not just look at regions, for example. We would also look at the particular participant and their skills. Hence, the reason we came up with those local WhatsApp groups, because they are on the ground. So we had to find a way in which we could have a few on the ground. So that grassroots representation helped us to come up with that 32 member team, which in our view, we still feel it was very representative. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I see Christina still has her hand up.
I don't know. Do you maybe have a question on time, or otherwise I would add this, because that was also a very specific thing, the huge time differences which we experienced, and finally we chose not a European time frame, but we said we want to work with coordinated universal time, UTC. And we really, as Germans and my German colleagues, me and also myself, we had to learn that, you know, it is not a European focused time frame now. And also workshops and program parts were done in times, or even could have done even a bit more in times which would be more suitable for others. We had also colleagues from Sri Lanka and Indonesia and West Papua, and I think this is, especially for us in Europe or maybe in the Northern Hemisphere, a very crucial point to learn, that in international digital conferences we should really get used to the fact that, you know, everyone has to stand up in the middle of the night, now and then, and so that the challenges are also shared in that sense.
Thank you a lot. We are coming to the end of the session. I think we would have had 20 billion more questions, but I'm sure we will find a different time to ask them. Please, if you have more material, if you want to add the video, and I think there's more videos also to watch, you can add them in the Padlet so our participants can watch that later on, show it to everybody and spread the good news. Because this session was about sharing good examples, was about giving a platform to different voices, and about seeing how important it is to network, to listen, and also to empower. That's something I learned from your presentation, that empowering each other and strengthening each other is a very important point in our shared mission. And I would like to thank you all, everybody who was active in this session, everybody who has contributed, and invite the participants to keep on reading, asking, networking, commenting, sharing, and all of this. And of course, I would also ask you to be back in 15 minutes for the next session. Have a good coffee break, lunch break, dinner, breakfast break, whatever. Have a good time, and see you soon.
Welcome back, everyone. We're delighted that you are back with us, and we hope you're back on time. Hope the break was refreshing and helpful to getting into this next to the last session of our time together. This has been an amazing journey. We have definitely been in a mode of rediscovery and also critical reflection. And certainly this session now will be the same. We are so blessed to have wonderful presentations that will be coming to us to help us sort out further the various details and the vision that we will set before us. Yes, in the final session, you will be looking at the manifesto. Of course, this is a major outcome of our time together, is to come up with this manifesto as a kind of way forward for all of us to adopt in our various regions and the various associations in church life that we are a part of. So we thank you for hanging in there. We've been global, and of course the time changes have us hopping in every direction, but thanks be to God, we've been able to manage. And so we thank you for your kind patience and understanding as we have worked through this time together. Most welcome. I would like to move quickly into our reflection time together. As I said, we have some key panelists that are with us who are going to share from their various regional perspectives this theme about moving into the future, the vision that goes before us as we depart from one another on this day. So without further ado, allow me to introduce who our panelists are. We will begin in just 1 second as I pull up their bios. Certainly, if you've been online, you already know who some of these experts are who are coming to us. But if you haven't, you'll hopefully be blessed by my reading of who these fine presenters will be. Our first presenter comes from Latin America, and her name is Ms. Sarah DeRoer. She has more than 15 years of practice in strategizing and leading organizational change to promote gender equality in Brazil and Latin America. She has extensive experience working alongside civil society organizations, non-governmental organizations, social movements, and local governments, universities, and vulnerable communities on communicating, planning, campaigning, and grassroots advocacy, both as a leader and an expert consultant. We are delighted to welcome you. Ms. DeRoer, you are welcome to have this space for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Angelique. It's great to be side by side with a wonderful woman as you. So thank you so much for the time and for the kind presentation. So I know I'm conscious that we have very short time, which for me as a Latin woman is a challenge, as I would tend to talk too much. But I try to make the best of this time. And I would like first to thankful for the invitation from the World Council of Churches. And it's great to see some familiar faces here today. And then I'd like to use this time to share a particular experience and reflect from this particular experience, which I think is relevant for the challenge that this seminar is proposing. So the experience that I have in mind was a campaign called We Are the Amazon, launched in 2018 in the context of the Pope Francisco Laudato Si. So we, as a number of ecumenical organizations and other civil society organizations, came out with a global call for a global ecumenical action in solidarity with Amazon community. So we had a number of faith-based organizations, churches, and different communities joining that action. This included a particular liturgy that we proposed based on theologians that work in the region. And we had the chance to have over 15 celebrations in different countries in the world, raising their voices and their prayers in solidarity with the forest and with the communities. We had a global statement with more than 30 countries joining it. And we had a call for engaging in a common communication strategy. What I would like to bring from that particular experience was that a number of challenges and learnings we had over that time. The first, I would say, is the contrast between the sense of urgency that most of communities were sharing with us in contrast with the challenge of communicating that in the speed and in the urgency that we were seeing the communities were facing. And we are talking about water scarcity, we are talking about the increasing mining activities, mining disasters in the Amazon region, but we are also talking about the recent report Global Witness just launched this week, saying that from every 4 environmental activists murdered in the world, 3 of them are in Latin America, and a quarter of them are in the Amazon region. So that gives us the sense that we are talking about life and death every day with those communities. And we knew that there was a huge expectation from the communities towards ecumenical global linkages. The fact that we are a global movement as an ecumenical movement brings us great responsibility in terms of how we are able to communicate communities' challenge and how we are able to build bridges in solidarity with their challenge and their relation. But we also had to acknowledge during that journey that there were power relations there. There were power relations related to unequal access to internet. There were power relations related to unequal access to language skills. So all of that represent a huge challenge in terms of how we put our communication and our campaigns to serve the reality of the communities at first. And then I'd like to bring a few ideas which I think could be relevant in terms of helping to build a vision for what would be an inclusive digital age from an ecumenical perspective, from a grassroots movement perspective as well. The first, I think it's around listening. Communication is what we express, but it's also what we are able to learn, what we are able to listen. And that means we also need to expand our own language skills. It's not only about the communities, but it's also about how international ecumenical organizations put themselves in terms of being able to listen. The second, it's our ability around sharing capacities, how we put our capacities to serve the communities that are in most need. And then I think when we think of that in terms of how we acknowledge that we are serving them, not us that are being served from their information. Yeah. And finally, I think that the last key idea is how we are strategic in terms of what we communicate, learning from community's vision on communication. And I just would like to finish with a short illustration from that. You see my background image here. Most of you know that as Brazilian nuts. As you may imagine, in Brazil, that's not called Brazilian nuts because we are in Brazil, so that would make no sense. It's called castanha do Pará. So I think that gives us a sense, it's a short illustration that gives us a sense that we are referring to things from an external perspective. And being able to communicate is being able to learn what communities are expressing. So the way they call this nut, it implies many other different informations than the ones that we have been able to express when we just share from our languages and in our own ways. So I'd like to conclude saying that I know this is a journey, as Angelique said, it's something that we are learning, and that's definitely something that's very, very relevant in terms of building global solidarity, in terms of making our organizations and our church available to serve those most in need. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. And that was a fine introduction into our time together. And we're very grateful. And I do like the image of the Brazilian nuts. That's very nice. And the diversity. And I appreciate your points around the urgency and strategic communications amongst us. And certainly that's what we're trying to move to in the manifesto, is around this being very strategic. And hopefully to express some of that urgency that you have experienced that is important in the Amazon and other places in which you work. So thank you so much, Mr. Work, for your presentation. We'll come back to you during the Q&A. Now it is my opportunity and my privilege to introduce to you Mr. Lorenzo Vargas. He is the program manager for communication for social change He is one who is involved in development. He's a development specialist, a researcher on citizens media. He's Colombian and Canadian. And there he directs the WACC's Communications for Social Change program, which supports grassroots sustainable development initiatives in the Global South. He holds degrees in international development and communication from York University and McGill University, and is in the process of pursuing a PhD in communication and culture at Ryerson University. There, he is affiliated with the Global Communication Governance Lab. He has also pursued studies on media and internet policy at the Diplo Foundation, the University of Brasilia, and the University of Oxford. His publications include Citizens Media as a tool for the local construction of peace in Colombia in 2013, Indigenous Community Media Aid Reconciliation in Canada, 2015, and Expanding Shrinking Communication Spaces with Philip Lee in 2020. He's a staff liaison for WACC Caribbean and WACC Asia region, and he speaks 3 languages. So, Mr. Lorenzo, we are delighted to welcome you with all the expertise you bring. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Angelique. I have 5 minutes, right?
Yes, that's right.
Well, thank you. It's so nice to be with all of you this morning for me, this afternoon or this evening for many of you. I just have a few points. I mean, the first question was, what are the main challenges for justice in digital societies? And I mean, I see many sort of superficial challenges. There's access to platforms, there's privacy, there's ethics. Those things are important. But to me, the biggest challenge is the concentration of digital power in the hands of a few, mostly US-based and I guess also Chinese companies that have an enormous influence, and not just economic influence, which would sort of be expected, but also influence on social dynamics, on politics, on social movements, on our personal lives, on public spaces, on media. How viable is media nowadays? So this is very, very, I would say, quite dangerous, actually, concentration of power in the hands of just a few private actors. And on the other hand, we have governments, and I would say probably as a result of 30 or 40 years of neoliberal thinking of, the government should not be intervening, we should stay out of the market. But in my opinion, governments that have been way too slow or reluctant or unwilling to act to break up companies that have way too much power, that have been too slow to demand transparency, have also been slow to create more viable local environments for the development of local tech industries. We see, when was the last time we heard of a global company from the global south that could theoretically compete with a company from the global north on a digital company? So really, there's states that are not really creating the conditions for even private sector competition within their own countries to come up. And also have been unwilling to think of public alternatives. Why can we not have a public alternative to Facebook or a public alternative to Zoom, or something that is publicly managed, publicly governed, and more transparent? In the same way that we have public broadcasters and we have public media, private media companies. So those to me are the main challenges: the concentration of power and the reluctance of governments to act. And I think in terms of the challenges for us as churches and civil society organizations, I mean, we're not driven by a profit motive, or we're not driven by political gain motives, but we're really driven by ethics and human rights concerns. So our role as churches and as ecumenical actors is to, first of all, learn about the digital rights movement, the digital justice movement that is already out there, has been active for several years now. And for us to understand how also get our communities to understand how the digital system works, how data works, how the monetization of data works, how data harvesting works, and for us to become involved. And part of that entails funding organizations in the Global South, particularly, that are at the forefront of the struggle for communication rights and digital justice. So, I mean, that's something I hope that comes out of this event, that we need to be able to move towards action, and action will require an investment because we're up against multi-billion-dollar companies that are concentrating digital power. We need to be able to democratize this power, and for that we need to begin financing organizations like IT for Change, like IdeoSync, like Ally, some of the case studies that we heard about during the past 2 days of this conference. I think I'll stop there. Am I within my 5 minutes?
I think you've done very well. Thank you so much. And thank you for the recommendations that you have offered. And I certainly want to appreciate your focus on the issue of power and control and resources in order for ethical life to prosper. And where the challenges are around the concentrated power and resources of the few versus the democratization of resources available for people to maximize the use of the tools of communication in the digital age. So thank you for bringing that to light. This will be very important as we think about the manifesto and we think about a strategy for the way forward. So we are grateful for your intervention. Let us now move on to our next speaker. And our next speaker is the Reverend James Bakwan. He is the General Secretary of the Pacific Conference of Churches. He is also known throughout the global community for his work in the Pacific. He is an ordained minister of the Methodist Church in Fiji and is also licensed to preach and celebrate the sacraments in the Anglican Diocese of Polynesia. He currently serves as, again, the General Secretary of the Pacific Conference of Churches. Previously, he served as the Secretary for Communication and overseas mission, as well as theological college staff and pastoral work in the Methodist Church in Fiji. Before entering the ministry, he worked in radio and television broadcast industries in Fiji from 1992 to 2006, and had a regular weekly column in the Fiji Times newspaper for a decade. That would be 2008 to 2017. Reverend Bakwan also is passionate. He is passionate as an advocate for ecological stewardship and climate justice. And I may add that I had an opportunity to work with him in the United States on that particular passion of his. He's quite articulate. He has a particular focus on care for the ocean, gender justice, and self-determination issues. Pastor or Reverend Bakwan is also a keen stand-up paddler, longtime volunteer chaplain, and crew member of the Fijian traditional voyaging canoe. Welcome, Reverend Bakwan. We welcome your expertise and certainly your passion, certainly that I know about in this space. The floor is now yours.
Thank you so much, Angelique. It's certainly a pleasure to be with you today, and my appreciation for the invitation to be on this panel. In the last hour, in the session just before, we heard of articles published on the WCC website in regards to the symposium. And one of these was by a colleague of mine, Olivia Mbaro. One of the issues of justice that she highlighted was one that all of us perhaps struggle of in terms of digital advocacy. It's 12:30 in the morning here in Fiji. That's 12:30 Thursday morning. And that's why I'm wearing black, as we are now already marking Thursdays in black in Fiji. I think the last time Angelique and I engaged in justice advocacy, as she mentioned, it was via a recorded message because of time zones. And I guess in this sense, I'm speaking about equity in terms of digital justice, particularly as we advocate on issues like climate justice, on ecological justice and development issues on the global level, and even in terms of digital justice itself. I was hoping to participate in the WAC working group on the public space, but just because of timing, time zones, I could not join in. The churches in our Pacific region have only really recently engaged in the digital sphere. And that's for a number of reasons. We are an oral culture where talanoa, which is the respectful face-to-face and heart-to-heart dialogue, is how we engage on all issues, even those of justice. And there are some who feel that the digital space is really being imposed on us, and that text-based communication undermines our indigenous forms of communication, particularly nonverbal physical engagement. However, as we have learned from our experience with COVID-19, COVID-19, we are adaptable and resilient people. And more people are engaging in the digital space, particularly as digital communities, mirroring our culture of community. And this supports, but as we heard on one of the keynote addresses on day one, it supports but cannot replace face-to-face engagement. Having said that, this space, those who can navigate it and maintain that rootedness with both the physical world and the digital world is an important space in terms of advocacy, in terms of engagement, particularly for those of us who are spread over the Pacific Ocean, which covers 1/3 of the planet. Most recently example I can give you is instead of just one very expensive Pacific Church leaders meeting in a year, we have this year, spurred on by COVID-19 restrictions, been able to have 3 online gatherings of Pacific Church leaders. The most recent one was yesterday, just a few hours ago, with over 30 church leaders from across 18 Pacific Island countries and territories spread over our ocean, joining in worship and prayer, in fellowship, sharing experiences, and in discussions. Another issue highlighted by Olivia that I would like to reiterate are the gaps that resonate with what has already been shared over the last 2 days. Access to digital infrastructure, the haves and the have-nots, the cost of connectivity. And while many of us focus on the economic cost of connectivity, I'd also like to remind us about the ecological costs of connectivity, the impact of what we need to connect on the environment. The intergenerational gaps. Recently, we have been hearing, and Olivia mentioned this in her article also, of teachers who have to walk through the jungle and walk up the mountains to get a signal to teach online classes for children who are in lockdown because of COVID-19. At the same time, in terms of communicating for justice, the digital space has opened up access. We in Fiji at the Pacific Conference of Churches are able to receive information on human rights abuses in West Papua in real time and share that with our networks. We're able to share the impacts of climate change and the degradation of biodiversity with the world. We're able to engage with our communities in worship and fellowship, providing pastoral support and, of course, the prophetic voice to the world. And that's not to say that the digital space is safe. And we've heard about this also in the last 2 days. We still find ourselves as those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, I guess. As I speak, I speak as someone who has been censored by one of our previous military juntas here in Fiji for reflections on justice in the national newspaper, which were deemed too political. And recently in Fiji, 6 members of parliament and 3 other high-profile politicians were taken into custody by the police over a weekend in relation to comments they made on social media regarding proposals to a land bill, all done in the digital space. So in times of political crisis, we have to remember that with crackdowns and censorship, there is going to be this rise of anonymity, which again gives us a challenge of verifying information, the challenge of trust, the challenge of safety in that nexus between the digital and the analog world. Thank you, Angelique. I'll leave it there.
Well, as usual, Reverend Bakwan, you have certainly informed us, inspired us, and certainly your passion comes through in every respect. We're grateful that you are, in this hour where you should probably be sleeping, that you have made this sacrifice to be with us today. So we know you really care about this issue. I really want to appreciate your points, particularly around cultural sensitivities and sensibilities, and how it is different communities are coming online, quote unquote, or not, and what are the challenges relative to that. And then, of course, the whole issues around inequities, around access and good access to the tools to further the conversation of wherever we may be. Of course, we'll come back to some of your other more substantive points as well. But for now, let us move on to the next speaker. And thank you once again, Reverend Bakwan. It is now my pleasure to introduce Mr. Ashley Green Thompson, who is the coordinator of the ACT Umbano. And Mr. Green Thompson is coordinator of the ACT Ubumbano, a network of Southern African and European organizations working for economic, gender, and environmental justice. Mr. Green Thompson has extensive experience in the work that he is doing. He is in the region doing work in the non-for-profit sector that is rooted in a commitment to social justice activism. He has worked across sectors from the nascent electoral processes of 1994 through formal church structures and in philanthropy. He has a Bachelor of Arts degree in African politics and law. It is my joy to welcome her to share the space.
Great, sorry, unmute myself and there we go. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm talking to you from Eswatini, the little kingdom of Swaziland, which is almost entirely surrounded by South Africa, which is my home country. But thanks for the opportunity, and I hope to follow these most sterling predecessors of mine who've spoken well within their time. The Act Ubumbano is the Zulu word for solidarity, and the ACT part of the name indicates our affiliation or our association with the ACT Alliance globally. And we really are trying to find new ways of doing solidarity, particularly in the collaboration between agencies in the North and those in the South. We look at facilitating critical reflection space where we can listen to each other and learn from community struggles. And out of that reflection emerge with social justice action, collaborative social justice action. One of the areas of work that we invest a lot of time in is what we call the Ubumbano Voice app. And that's based on the principle that if you can't hear the voice of those communities who are defending their dignity and struggle, then all you are is a professional development worker who is following somebody else's agenda. And so we've created this app and website to act as to provide a platform where the voice of communities and their own lived experience is broadcast without being filtered or edited by NGO hacks or editors or donors or anybody else. It is directly putting activists and community voices into the public domain, whether it be in the policy space, in the political space, or in the faith space as well. That's what we want to do. And we've only been doing it for a short while, but already you encounter a whole range of challenges to that. And I'm going to mention just 3 as a contribution to the reflection that we're having now. The first, and I think it's been mentioned, I think Reverend James from the future mentioned the question of access to infrastructure. And that's something that applies in this part of the world as well. And that, I think, a big part of the brief for this session is about the state and the private sector's responsibilities too. That I just came out of a meeting this morning with other organizations of civil society. And one of the things that emerged from the meeting is the need to pressurize the cell phone companies to lower the cost of data and in fact to provide it as a public good, particularly in remote and marginal communities. So joined up campaigns, I think the churches can add, the faith institutions can add an important gravitas, if you want, to civil society and community campaigns for access and infrastructure. The second challenge we face, and this is where we have, at least I feel that we've got some control. We're not externalizing the solution. It's something that we hold ourselves and we try and do it. And that is about how do we enhance the capability of those communities and community activists to tell their story and to do that in a way that basically how we can amplify their voice. And so what we've been doing is to provide, especially during this time of COVID lockdown, to provide online training in writing skills and in analytical skills, right? So how do you actually develop an understanding of a problem that's happening in your community rather than just describing it superficially? So it's a deepening of a very important political skill. And much like Polynesia, we have Africa is an oral, it's rooted, it's steeped in oral traditions. But writing is an important organizing tool as well. And it's a little bit more difficult to dispute something that's written than it is to dispute something that's oral. So we see that as an important organizing tool as well. And when you bring people together to deepen their ability to analyze and understand the reality that they face, you're also putting in place the building blocks for a connection that leads to joined up and collaborative solidarity and social justice action. We're nowhere near that. Actibumbano is a mere 2 years old as a registered organization. So we've got a ways to go. But I think that I'm hoping that by constantly engaging in conversations with other spaces where digital justice is being discussed, maybe, just maybe, we can find new connections and actually have new forms of action emerging. And I think that's my 5 minutes, Angelique. Thank you very much.
Well, and thank you very much. And I really want to appreciate the community of focus that you have in the work that you're doing. That is critical, whether we're working at the global, national, or state levels. The community, the local community matters in terms of the synergies and the places of accountability. So thank you for lifting that up, and the importance of coming together to have collaborative thinking and analytical reflection is very important. So thank you so much for sharing that. And we will look forward to further discussion relative to the points you've made. It is now my joy to bring on our final panelists. And what I would like to say to everyone, please start putting your questions in the chat. It will be time for Q&A soon. And we certainly want to be ready to engage our presenters. Our final speaker will be the Reverend Milis Solt. He is the outreach coordinator for the Council of Lutheran Churches in Great Britain and the assistant to the bishop in the Lutheran Church in Great Britain. He has been a religious radio journalist for more than 2 decades in Estonia public broadcasting. And since 2021, he works as the outreach coordinator for the Council of Lutheran Churches in Great Britain, as assistant to the bishop in the Lutheran Church in Great Britain, and assistant pastor in St. Anne's Lutheran Church in London. He has studied both theology and journalism, and is vice chair of the Estonian Union of Journalists. He has been active in different human rights, civil society, and Christian communication initiatives throughout his career, his vocation. And so it is my joy to bring you, Pastor, to this time together. The floor is yours.
Hello.
Hello, you're welcome.
Thank you very much for inviting me here. Yes, I'm pastor since Saturday, so this is really a new experience also for me. So most of my life I have been indeed a journalist and living and working in Estonia. So I come from a country which is often set as a good example of well-functioning digital society. I really can't agree with that fully, but now also having an experience of living abroad and here in the UK for almost a year, there are really things that I like about my country. And they may seem small things, but finally they become big altogether. For example, digital authentication and digital signature is available to all. We know that in every country there is a passport or ID card, which is obligatory. But Estonian ID card includes also digital signature. I know that this is not anymore anything exceptional, but I doubt that it is so widely implemented in any other country than in Estonia. So that means that all documents can be signed from home or from smartphone. All government systems are accessible for everyone without waiting for an appointment. And this giving and using digital signature and authentication is free or with very low cost if people choose a mobile ID version. And there are also free apps available, which are based again on this Estonian ID card certificate. So comparison here in the UK, people need to go through sometimes quite difficult procedure to identify themselves before they can access a bank account or government systems. And it is much more easier if everything is accessible with national ID, which has already the digital ID itself. But the signature itself is nothing if it can't be used widely. So it means that both public sector and private sector come along and they create services that are accessible. So if we are talking about big tech companies and the concentration of digital power, Facebook logins, Google logins are very commonly used, but there is a state ID login as well available for Estonian people, and that's very useful. And also the government services are made really accessible. That filling in the tax declaration takes 5 minutes. Creating a company or non-profit organization just with a few clicks, because you are identified, you can enter the system and apply to create a company or whatever you need. Voting is possible online. And that has become an important thing for younger generation who is not eager to go to polling stations on specific days or only one day. And it has increased now this digital signature and e-voting in connection with it. It has increased the voice of younger generation who are now also participating more in elections and going and voting online. Now, some can ask, what about those people who don't have computers or internet access? In my country, in Estonia, public libraries are trying to fill that gap in Estonia. They provide computers, internet access. Some people are there to help you with. So I would say that the state and public service and together with private sector, they can do a lot to move the society further towards digital society. And also Estonia is doing a lot at the moment to bring the broadband internet everywhere. In fact, exactly today, a fiber optic cable was installed to my house 25 kilometers from the capital. It is done together with of course European Union money, but the resources are used for providing the fast connections to remote areas as well, not only in cities. So when we ask also about the churches, and here I can bring in the UK experience, I have to say that the COVID pandemics has significantly increased the capacity of providing online contact, and also the church goers, they learn to participate online. The Lutheran Church in the UK had to stay at home for more than 1 year because the pandemic situation here was in the UK was quite difficult, and all the services were online for so long period. And actually we went so far that we started inviting people to participate in Holy Communion online as well, with bread and wine at their homes. And I know that it's a big step further for some of the mainline churches, but we had no choice. It was the choice keeping people away from the sacrament for more than a year, or doing things online. And I have to say that not everyone agreed to participate on Eucharist online, but those who participated in it have given their witness that they felt the presence of Christ in a very similar way. And I have to also say that the faith communities together with the younger generation can do a lot to provide also the necessary equipment and basic training to those who have not been familiar with IT. And in our Lutheran Church in Great Britain, we have also a lot of older people, but 70s, 80s, people in their 70s, 80s, they can connect the Zoom meeting. So it has taken some time, but I think we are there, and no one is left behind.
Well, thank you so much, Pastor. And we are delighted to hear these affirmations, particularly with the interventions of the state, where we're glad to see where government and state is coming together to resource the community. This is important. Of course, there are so many gaps globally relative to the role of government providing such resources. So to hear that in your space, this is going on and stepping into that void, if you will, is certainly very encouraging. But of course, the issues of inequities continue in so many places. We also want to thank you for the many years you've served as a journalist and how it will inform your pastoral care. And then also, of course, the communicative aspects of your ministry going forward. Well, we've heard a lot. I've asked for questions. Unfortunately, I don't see any in the chat, and I haven't been informed of any questions. So I'm going to exercise moderator privilege and come back to each of the speakers with questions that I think we might want to further. I would like to give each speaker a brief, and I do say brief, like 30-second opportunity to cover a point that you may have heard from another panelist that you think you need to either echo or to engage in whatever way that feels right to you from your own regional space in the work that you're doing. So if we can come in the order in which we began, I'm just going to go back to the order that we began with Ms. Sarah DeRoer, and then of course, Mr. Lorenzo Vargas, and then Mr. Green Thompson, and of course, Reverend Bakwan, and to end with Pastor Sold. Again, what did you hear just briefly, again, that you may want to echo or engage in some way, say in about, I'm sorry, 30 seconds, maybe 45 max, but if you would do that, that would be great. And there may be more questions that come. However, before we start that, we have a celebration in the house. And her name is Miss Sarah DeRoer, who we're going to start with. It's her birthday. Hello, we love celebrations. Let's just throw our hands up right there and say, throw her some love. Happy birthday. We love it. Another year of God's blessings to us and to you. Okay, Ms. DeRoer, with that being said, you have your 30 to 45 seconds to give your response. And yes, you can celebrate with us too. We think that's okay.
Thank you. So I take advantage from my birthday and I take 15 seconds more. So just to say, what Mr. Lorenzo shared, I think it's very interesting in terms of reflecting how corporate power is also perpetuating structural inequalities in South America, in Latin America as a whole, when he talks about corporate control. And also what Ashley shared really resonates with me in terms of South-South learning and what we can learn in Latin America from the experience in South Africa, and how we can connect and communicate communities among them, not only from the South towards the North, but also how we strengthen South-South solidarity as well.
Thank you. That was a perfect foundation to jump off from for the rest of the speakers. So again, happy birthday to you, and over to Mr. Vargas, please.
Thank you, Angelique, and of course, happy birthday to you, Sarah. I quite enjoyed the presentation by Reverend Suld. It's great to see the ways in which things have been working in different contexts to bring communities together online through the pandemic. And what was happening in Estonia, creating more opportunities for the internet to become a more inclusive space. And I quite enjoyed the presentation I enjoy everybody's presentation, I should say, but by the points made by my colleague Sarah DeRoer on the idea of speaking from her own perspective, and this idea of the Brazil. Not first, I was a bit confused. I thought you were like a vegan or something that was promoting veganism or something. But no, I think it's great. Like, there's many perspectives, many voices that are coming from different countries in the global South and the global North, And we need to create spaces as we build this communication rights movement, this digital justice movement, for all those voices to be heard, different languages to be heard, not just English, but also not only Spanish and Portuguese, that are also colonial languages, but also indigenous languages, indigenous perspectives. Thank you all.
And thank you very much. Let's go now to Mr. Ashley Green Thompson, please.
Yeah, happy birthday, Sarah. We had occasion to interact a few years ago in the early stages of my organization, and so I was quite taken by the question of meaning and listening. We do a lot of work with faith leaders in the region here in Southern Africa around particularly gender-based violence, which is the pandemic in Southern Africa, as well as LGBTI struggles and SRHR and all those things. And one of the things that I found fascinating is to take us to pause a moment and actually try and understand what it is the people you're engaging with are saying. Because once you're able to do that, you're able to then start a journey with them that moves them from a position of conservatism or recalcitrance to a position of change and progressiveness. And it's been phenomenal. I mean, go check out our website. The language question, we've translated the work that we've done into local languages, not just the colonial languages. So yeah, it's been absolutely brilliant. Thanks for that.
And thank you so much. Let's go over to Reverend Bakwan, please.
Thank you. Yes, happy birthday, Sarah. Oh, well, maybe it was belated birthday because it's Thursday here now. I just want to go back to something that Lorenzo was sharing on, and really around the corporate aspect of communication and digital justice, and the challenge for us in terms of corporate capture, particularly when we're talking about intellectual property, when we're talking about cultural intellectual property, when we're talking about biodiversity, who maintains and how people are able to access that and strip that away, the loss of meaning, something that we've already all spoken about. I must say that we here in Fiji are quite fortunate. I pay $10 a month for 70 gigabytes of quite fast data. So we're quite spoilt in some parts. But on another island, not far from this island, there is no connectivity because the telecommunications company says it's not viable. And so that's the challenge between economic corporate viability and justice for communication. So, I'm glad to see we've got some resonance in what everyone has been sharing. Thank you.
And thank you, Pastor Bakwan. I'm going to bring on, of course, Pastor Sold, Melise Sold, and I just want to put you on notice. There are a few questions for you that will be coming next after you give your initial response. Thank you so much.
Yes, big tech companies and just a handful of them are already mentioned. Lorenzo mentioned that, and I think this is a problem. But I think that also it reminds me again that the strategy of Estonia, where state supports the startup companies, which are very often the IT companies. Our background is that Skype was developed in Estonia, and well, later, of course, bought by Microsoft, and that it's not that good anymore, I think. but what has Estonia done is it is quite strict with immigration, but there is exception for the startup companies. So if someone comes to work for the startup companies, then the doors are open. Welcome to Estonia. So these things can be done to help to create new IT companies and new initiatives, and there is a big role for the state to play.
And thank you for your initial response. Now, I must say, there are 4 questions for you, Reverend Salt. So I don't know quite where to start, but let us begin. We're down to about 10 minutes now for our concluding time. So I'll try to take just a couple at a time, and you can just deal with it that way. So these are 2 questions coupled together, one from Michael Cooper Oshley, and then Benjamin Simon. The first one from Michael is, if I wonder if there has been any resistance to Estonia's push to a digital society, or whether it has been fully embraced by most segments of the society. And then Benjamin Simon also asked, if online voting is possible on a national level, how about the danger of being hacked and influenced by other governments or political groups? So if you could quickly respond to those two questions, and I'll come back with the last.
I would say that it has been embraced by most of the society, and somehow, you know, I'm not an IT specialist, but I understand that there are IT specialists who monitor the script and the voting system, and they try hacking inside, and so there are experts who are working on that. So also the trust in e-voting is rather high. There can be any fraud also on paper, and there are observers. So we also have a kind of digital observers. I'm not expert. I don't know how does it work, but there are those people, and I would say that those actually who try to attack the e-voting system are those who are targeting the older generation and who would be happier to have the less younger generation voting. So they go publicly trying to say that it's not safe, let's not do it, and that would give less voice for the younger generation to go on elections.
And thank you for your brevity, but also your substance. So these last two questions. To what extent can digital progress and presence help to overcome tensions between different national groups in Estonia? And then a second question, has there been any resistance to Estonia's push to a digital society? And then finally, I'm trying to put it all through together. Actually, there's a third one. To what extent can the digital presence help to overcome tensions between national groups, different national groups in Estonia? Thank you.
I would say as the digital ID, for example, which is kind of a starting point, is available to all, then this is also available to Russian minority, a Russian-speaking minority in Estonia. And even, for example, if they don't have the if they don't have the Estonian passport, but they have the permission to live in Estonia, then they still can have the same ID card with a digital signature and access to all the services. So that is equal, even if the person does not have the citizenship and has only the long-term permission to stay, which gives almost the same rights. And also I have to say that all the online systems, even if Russian language, for example, is not official language in Estonia, then it is done both in Estonian and Russian and English, so that I think most of the people are able to access all the services actually in 3 languages. So I would see it as a possibility again to overcome the problems and give more equal rights to people who are living in the country, regardless of the citizenship.
And thank you once again for your brevity, but also the substance. This is a question for everyone to briefly respond to. Again, briefly, do you think it is possible that the large global church fellowship can negotiate for safe online spaces with the tech providers, especially with millions of users? They may have a certain influence in this regard. What would be your responses, each of you, very quickly? And then after that, we're going to have closing comments from each of the speakers and wrap up our time together. So let's begin with Mr. Ashley Green Thompson, then Pastor Bhagwan, and then Mr. Rohr. and then Mr. Vargas, and then of course, Pastor at the end. Can we go in that order quickly? Thank you. Oh dear, it seems that we've lost, no, there he is. Mr. Ashley Green Thompson, we wanted you to go first to answer the question briefly.
Well, you would do that just when my infrastructure lets me down and I got kicked off the internet for a short while.
Sorry for that,
but
right to the point.
So you want a closing remark? I think.
No, actually, this question about the Global Fellowship and its role in negotiating with the online spaces very briefly, and what your thoughts might be of the role of the Global Faith Community or the Ecumenical Fellowship or Church Fellowship.
So Acto Bumbano has a strong faith identity, but we understand that not everybody is part of the faith community. So the connection between in the civil society movement and the churches or the faith community is massively important. And increasingly, because it's a highly Christian region, the churches have quite a great deal of influence, particularly at the moment in Eswatini, with the recent violence that happened. It's the churches that will probably be a key player in bringing the authorities to speak with communities. So I think we need to go more of a confident approach as churches. And the question asks about negotiating. What is the word? Provocative, and say we can demand. You know, we need to be quite confident in the fact that these are basic rights that are to which people and communities are entitled. And so I think we should be a little bit more forceful in how we engage in such things. And I can see that you're freezing every now and then, so I'm probably coming across in bits and pieces.
No, you've come
I hope that made
just
sense.
very quickly. Thank you so much. We appreciate. Okay, so over to you, Pastor Bakwan, and then over to Mr. Vargas.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of challenges in this is recognizing where the different tech companies operate, recognizing, I think for churches, not all churches value the digital space equally. And so that's going to be important. And then of course, the issue of regulation, but regulating the space between government and corporations. So I think those are some things I perhaps would like reflection on, and that's, you know, the challenge that we face. But certainly within countries, within regions, those are things that can be engaged. We need to, I think, for some of us who are only slowly getting into this space after, you know, maybe a decade, we're a bit behind. We're catching up, but there still is a lot to be learned by those in leadership about the value of this space, particularly if because of generational gaps, they don't enter into it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Vargas, over to you.
Thanks, Angelique. I'd like to end by thanking everybody and encouraging all of us to really learn from the communities that we're serving on the ground that are experiencing digital exclusion and are facing issues exercising their communication rights, as well as for us to really connect and join the existing digital rights movement out there. I think we as ecumenical actors have something to add from a maybe a theological or ethical perspective. So I think our perspectives are needed in the movement. So I would just invite all of us to really become more involved and learn from each other. Thank you.
And thank you. Over to you, Mr. Moore.
Yeah, I think regarding the question on how the global church community can advocate towards big techs, I think that the two thoughts that comes to my mind. The first is advocating not only for its own safe space, but for the safe space as a right for everyone. I think that's important because otherwise it becomes only corporate advocacy. And the second thought that crossed my mind is that there is, in terms of building safe digital space, there is a lot homework to be done among the churches. We must be honest to acknowledge the fact that part of the challenge around fake news, part of the challenge around how the public space is being corrupted by private control, it's also in regard to some faith expressions. So some of important drivers of fake news on the digital space today are developed by or pushed by faith actors. So I think there is, of course, some public advocacy from the church global community, but there is also a lot of homework to be done in terms of how we build justice voice among churches and among faith communities as well, so we can together intervene and build a different voice and different theological perspective as well.
And thank you. Over to you quickly, Pastor Salt.
I just want to give an example of what happened in summer. There is Archbishop Urmas Viilma's Facebook page that lost somehow access to he lost control over his Facebook page. Maybe he put wrong password, entered from another country. I don't know what happened, but it has been not possible for him to regain the access to his public page, which has like 4,000 followers. And I understand that he has tried everything, and he has tried to contact the Estonian government and try to access somehow to give on the message to the Facebook that he needs his Facebook page back, but it's not somehow possible. So he had to create a new one just a week ago. So there is like no way to contacting the big tech companies in a kind of human ways. So yeah, perhaps there can be done something together to create those channels, how to communicate with them, because otherwise we are just one tiny against the big machine. So for sure a dialogue would be needed.
And thank you for bringing that illustration up. I think this is again another illustration of the importance of advocacy. Advocacy for each other in community, in solidarity with community in the Global Fellowship. Okay, we're down to the end of our time together. You get one sentence to wrap up what it is you might like to say so that we can meet our time commitment. So one sentence that you want to just summarize, or a recommendation that you want to give to all of our fellowship today. One sentence. So over to you, Mr. Rohr. Then, of course, Mr. Vargas, Pastor Bakwan, Pastor Sud, and then Mr. Ashley Green Thompson. One sentence, go right ahead.
So peace and justice also for the digital space, safe digital space, and a justice digital space that can include people and the environment.
Thank you. Mr. Vargas?
Yeah, I would say that for me, it's all about a movement. We cannot achieve any of these changes alone. We need to do it together. We need to work across all sorts of lines that divide us in order to achieve change. Thank you.
Thank you. Pastor Bakwan?
Yeah, let's decolonize the North-South digital divide. Perhaps in solidarity, those in the global North can hold your meetings, conferences, symposiums in our Southern Hemisphere time zones. That would be a good act. Naka, thank you.
Thank you, Pastor. And then over to you, Pastor Sud.
Be open for developments in IT world, and be creative online.
Thank you. And also to you, Mr. Green Thompson. Yes, that's you. Go right on.
You're not hearing me.
We can hear you.
So the digital technology provides us with an opportunity to listen more intently to the voice of those who suffer.
Thank you so much to all of the panelists. We say, I give you applause, and we celebrate birthdays, and we celebrate the witness of all of you. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. You get a break of all of like 15 minutes. Okay, maybe it's 12 or 13 now, but be back shortly so we can begin our final session. Thank you so much, everyone. God bless. Let's take a break.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome back, everyone. It's time to have a final time together, although it's really not final, but it's the end of the symposium in terms of formalities. It actually is the beginning of a new journey together as we lead this symposium with some tools, resources, and hopefully new relationships that can strengthen our voices in the communication age of digital technology. And so we come to this time together, ready to give the final touches on what that strategy will be with our manifesto. This time together is really so much about the manifesto and what you think about it and what your inputs will be relative to the manifesto. So I hope you're ready to go with that. But before we get into the exercise of the presentations and your input as well, we want to remember what happened during this time together. And so we do have a special presentation of slides to reflect on together. So over to our presenter for the slide presentation. Well, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Isn't it nice to know we've been on this journey together? Okay, without further ado, we need to go to the next steps of what it means to be on this journey together. And so we are pleased to bring to you the manifesto. And many of you have contributed over these past days to this document that we trust will become a document that all of us own, a strategy that all of us will own going forward. So it is my joy now to bring to you one who has been working so hard with this symposium, as well as the rest of the team. And again, we thank all of the team for all of what you've done to bring this moment together and all the partners. But in this moment, we want to hear from Dr. Stephen Brown, who works with the communications team of the World Council of Churches and is the editor of the World Council of Churches Journal for the Ecumenical Review. And of course, he is one of the coordinators of the Manifesto editorial group. So over to you, Dr. Brown, and thank you so much for what you've done to bring us to this point.
Thank you very much, Angelique. You've said that we're on a journey, and the journey began on Monday, but the journey is not finishing today. On Monday, I presented to you a draft manifesto. It was a working document. It had gaps in it. It had bullet points without the text next to it. And the point was to say that this is a manifesto that needs to emerge from our journey together during our 3 days together. And over the past 3 days, we've had rapporteur, Erin, Matt, Lynn, who you will see in this session today. We've been listening to the discussion. We've been looking at the comments that you've made in the chat. We've been listening to the comments that have been made in the symposium. And the manifesto has been enriched with your comments and with your input. And now we want to present to you today the next version of the manifesto. Again, it's a working document. It's not the final document. We want this to be a session where we take stock of what we've got, listen to your input, listen to your comments. And after this symposium officially closes today, the mailbox is still open for you to make comments until Sunday, questions, clarifications, disagreements maybe. And today we will take a copy of all of the chat comments, which we will take into account looking at the next version of the manifesto. We will take the comments which are sent to the email address that you can see on the screen and which you should have received in your email box this afternoon. And we will also use the online platform. Earlier this afternoon, we sent you the manifesto in the English version. We have translations into French, German, and Spanish in preparation, and we will circulate those as soon as they're available. And next week, a new version of the manifesto will be sent out to you, but we hope that you won't see this as a final document, a closing statement, but rather the next step on our journey together, something to be used in your contexts and localities. And also, we include a question when we send you the manifesto. One of the points in the manifesto is to say, we need to develop a program of action together. So we will be looking for your suggestions and ideas as to action that we can take to make the digital age more human, more communicative, and more positive. The rest of following my introduction now, Erin and Matt will read the manifesto and present that to you. This will be followed by 3 reflections from different parts of the world on what the manifesto might mean in those particular situations. After that, we will have a time for open discussion and comment. And hopefully that we will be able to take and harvest your comments for the next stage of our journey together. So we're really interested and excited what will happen in this session, what comments you've got, and look forward to working with you, not just in the next hours, but in the next days and weeks as we look forward together as to what it means to talk about communication for social justice in the digital age. Thank you.
Very much, Dr. Brown. Let us now turn to the introductions of our readers for the manifesto, members of the committee. It's been my joy to work with them as well in terms of the presentation of the manifesto today. We bring to you Dr. Erin Green, who is a Canadian-Belgian researcher and activist working in the area of artificial intelligence, democracy, and the militarization of digital technologies. She is communications and Asia Pacific coordinator for Pax Christi International. And then we bring to you Mr. Matt Barlow, who works in the communications unit of the Association of Protestant Churches and Missions in Germany. Welcome, Erin, welcome, Matt, to present the document.
We begin by discussing our global context. Digital technologies are transforming our world and the multiple spaces in which we live and move. These technologies offer us new ways to communicate, to advocate for our human rights and dignity, and for our voices to be heard. They create new ways for us to interact with each other beyond boundaries of time and space. They can be powerful tools for living in relation with others, for inclusion, education, encounter, imagination, creativity, and understanding. Yet digital technologies provide both opportunities and challenges. Digital platforms are also being used to spread deliberate disinformation and hate. Politically motivated digital campaigns of fake news undermine democratic processes and responsible journalism. While digital platforms seem to provide unfettered opportunities for freedom of expression, growing digital technology monopolies threaten a diversity of voices and perspectives. Communication is increasingly mediated by proprietary platforms that promise a dream of democratized empowerment, but monetize data and treat time in the so-called attention economy. Users have become the new commodity. Private data is increasingly requested, collected, and controlled by a small number of platforms to take advantage of people for economic and political purposes. Surveillance, marginalization, and militarization are significant threats in digital spaces. Algorithms developed according to subjective criteria, the lingering effect of colonialism and systemic power imbalances, reflect and exacerbate existing inequities and discrimination. The COVID-19 pandemic also amplifies inequities. Those who are digitally excluded become increasingly marginalized due to a shift to online learning and economies. Cybersecurity concerns are increased, particularly in the field of healthcare.
Theological perspectives. This transformation of society raises profound issues with which the Ecumenical Fellowship has been wrestling for many decades: power, justice, equity, participation, promoting sustainable communities, how voices from the margins are heard, as well as human dignity. In seeking to respond to the issues raised by digital transformation, we can find in many faith traditions an incredible depth of insight about what it means to be human and to live justly within the web of creation. Two intrinsically connected aspects must play a central role in a theological reflection on digital justice: relationality and vulnerability. Christians believe that being created in the image of God provides inherent dignity to every woman, man, and child. Humans are created to be relational and capable of collaboration and communication. We are called to take responsibility and care for God's creation. In Jesus, God became vulnerable and shared human life. Therefore, creation and human beings remain at the center of our reflections and our concerns. This shared vulnerability motivates us to protect individual and community rights and to use digital technologies for the well-being of human beings. The biblical preferential option for the poor and vulnerable directs and informs our attention to the digital divides in the global face of digitization. We are called to a journey of justice and peace and to ensure the integrity of creation. We are called to participate in God's mission to ensure that all may have life and have it abundantly. Also, we dare to say, in the digital sphere. In 2022, the Ecumenical Fellowship will gather in Karlsruhe, Germany, for the 11th Assembly of the World Council of Churches. In a world marred by many kinds of injustice and by the pain of many of its people, its creatures, and even of the earth itself. But it is also a world that is witnessing movements of change, justice, and hope.
Issues and challenges. Digitalization in its many forms raises new questions about human freedom and identity. Not only social coherence, but human dignity itself is at stake. Digitalization also raises ecological concerns. Political, cultural, civil society actors, and communities of faith are all struggling to respond effectively. To respond to challenges and opportunities of the digital age, we need an inclusive and holistic participatory approach that is both international and intergenerational, based on the sacred value of social justice. This prompts us to ask, how can we envision and work for a communication and information ecosystem based on social justice principles such as participation, freedom, equity, sustainable life, and solidarity, a system that enables everyone to exercise fully their human rights, civil rights, and responsibilities, that strengthens a sense of belonging and collective participation, that encourages alliances and coalitions that build credibility, mutual accountability, and trust, that is sensitive to missing, ignored, silenced, and marginalized voices in the digital sphere, that combats both explicit and implicit bias, racism, gender discrimination, and extremism in digital technologies, that is not profit or power-oriented, yet remains attractive to users, that encourages platforms that promote community, cohesion, collaboration, and relationship building, that leverages open source technologies in a digital economy.
We identified the following challenges. The digital divides. We face various digital divides: economic, geographic, racial, educational, gender, age, technological, and global. There are also digitally caused divides. These digital divides point to both the complexity of social justice in a digital age and the need for intersectional reflection. Digital justice requires, at the same time, gender justice, climate justice, economic justice, racial justice, and so much more. Accessibility. The primary concern is often seen as access to the digital space itself, emphasizing the difference between lower, middle, and higher income economies, but also in-country differences. Accessibility includes access to basic communication infrastructure, such as stable electricity and internet connections, tech devices, access to various digital tools, data, programming, and content from the local cultural context, but also the legal frameworks and economic resources to access and invest in them. Access affects power relations and distributions of resources, and as such, access to digital technologies is both a cause and a result of divides. Accessibility is an essential issue in the disabled community. Digitalization has improved participation in economic activity, entertainment, and social interaction for people with disabilities. Accessibility in this sphere, however, also remains divided along global wealth lines.
Public space. This is the space where states, citizens, and non-citizens interact, where people, including the media, can express thoughts and feelings and participate toward democracy. Digitalization creates the opportunity for expanding this space, but the restriction of digital freedom can also cause this space to shrink. Inequity, control, use, and analysis of data gathered due to digitalization is heavily vested in a few corporations and in specific geographic regions. Governments may also be heavily implicated in data control and manipulation.
Education. Digital education, including in questioning and critical examination of information and sources, is vital for all people. Access to this education is awfully sharply divided based on age, academic background, gender, geographical location, and societal gender roles. Gender justice. Women benefit from digitalization in the personal, educational, and economic arena, and active participation in the digital space can contribute to full participation in all domains of life. However, pervasive gender power inequalities restrict this access. Increased digitalization has also led to greater exposure of girls and women to sexualized harassment, surveillance, trolling, and online hate, which may also lead to physical violence. The impact of online violence is silencing women, forcing them to disengage from the digital space.
Privacy and security. The universal challenges of the use of data and loss of privacy are compounded by arbitrary government control, national digital laws, and guidelines that are vague and fraught with loopholes, internet blackouts that clamp down on online dissent, and unwarranted state surveillance. Militarization. There is military investment in digital technologies, and the technologies are in turn militarized, creating increasing risk in situations of conflict.
Principles to promote communication for social justice in a digital age. No matter the issue, violence against women, poverty, conflict resolution, self-determination, racism, migration, health, land, climate, little can be done without effective communication. For this, we need a holistic, inclusive approach to create digital technologies that promote life, dignity, and justice rather than undermine it. We need principles that allow all people to engage in transparent, informed, and democratic debate, where people have unfettered access to the information and knowledge essential to peaceful coexistence, empowerment, responsible civic engagement, and mutual accountability. Rooted in the history of communication rights, these principles provide for a world in which everyone is entitled to communicate, to inform, and to share knowledge. This requires equitable access to communication infrastructures and the right to free expression. Everyone is entitled to participate in the information and communication society with particular consideration for minorities and vulnerable groups. This requires inclusive and participatory governance of media infrastructures and digital platforms. Everyone is entitled to fair and unbiased public communication. This requires ethical norms, accountability, and redress for misrepresentation. Everyone is entitled to dignity and respect. This requires transparency and accountability of media and digital platforms. Everyone is entitled to privacy and control of their information, including deleting their data. This should be inherent and intrinsic to each person's digital identity and requires legal frameworks and knowledge. Everyone is entitled to their own cultural and linguistic identity. This requires linguistic diversity and access to local media. Everyone is entitled to communication skills and media literacy. This requires adequate training and building of skills of dialogue, conversation, listening, openness, and critical thinking. Everyone should be allowed to participate as much as they are willing to without being pressured to participate more than they feel comfortable. Everyone has access to sustainable power sources to enable their digital or electronic media. This requires access to technologies such as solar or wind power. Everyone is entitled to affordable devices. This requires economic resources as well as the right to repair.
A transformative movement. To achieve digital justice, we need a transformative movement of individuals, communities, educational institutions, media agencies, and civil society, including communities of faith. And we need government policies and actions that are informed and supported by civil society, founded on human rights, human dignity, and democratic principles. Fundamental rights will not prevail on their own or through voluntary commitments by corporations. That is why the broad support and joint commitment of civil society, including churches and faith communities, political actors, science, and business, is needed to guarantee and protect civil rights in the digital age, as well as to make the digital space usable for the common good. We gathered in the Symposium on Communication for Social Justice in a Digital Age to explore these issues, to reflect and to share visions of a future in which technologies are placed at the service of people rather than governments or corporations. We underlined the need for shared principles of inclusion, respect, and equity. We pointed to the vital importance of communication rights for marginalized peoples and communities worldwide. We affirmed that rights in digital spaces must be an extension of human rights in public spaces. We rejected any justification of online violence through misuse of the gospel. We agreed on the centrality of the rights of children and that young people need to be embraced and offered a place of leadership in our digital transformation. We emphasized that collected, non-personal data should be available to serve the common good. We underlined the need for increased accountability and transparency on the part of corporations who have the power and ability to influence and shape public and political discourse. We highlighted the dangers of the darknet for illegal and harmful activities such as organ trafficking, human trafficking, sexual exploitation, weapon and drug sales, and even recruitment to extremist organizations. We reject such dangers. To unlock the opportunities and address the challenges of digital technologies, we need to reimagine continuously our digital public sphere, emphasizing democracy, fundamental rights, mutual accountability, and solidarity. We will create spaces and channels that are inclusive, interactive, and participatory, promoting digital justice, expanding public space, and creating visions for the future. We will create a grassroots, faith-inspired resistance to the forces challenging human dignity and flourishing in digital spaces. We will develop a program of action to create this reimagined reality in different contexts. We will continue to act together so that justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Thank you.
And thank you very much. We are very grateful for the reading of the manifesto in its draft form. We are grateful to all of you who will give any additional comments or questions you may have. Please, you will be using the chat, and we will also have time a bit later to bring your comments verbally as well. But in the meantime, do begin to put your comments and reflections in the chat. And please note that this session is being recorded. It will be a resource as we continue forward with the revisions of the document. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce to you persons from the different regions who will offer up to 5 minutes of reflection relative to the document and the symposium. We begin our regional reflections with the Reverend Leonardo Felix. Reverend Felix is the president of the Latin American region of the World Association for Christian Communication and the executive director of the Latin American and Caribbean News Agency, ALC. Reverend Felix, you're welcome in this space.
Hola, buenas tardes. Voy a hablar en español. ¿Se escucha? Do you hear me?
Yes, we hear you perfectly fine. And I might add, make sure that everyone is aware there is an interpretation button for all interpretations, which has been previously announced.
Muy bien. Muy bien, voy a ser muy breve. Disculpen que no tengo cámara, pero la conexión es muy débil.
Brief comment. I apologize for not having a video connection, but my connection is not very strong at the moment. It is very important from WACC and from our communication agency in Latin America and the Caribbean, ALC, ALC Noticias, to be able to emphasize some points that Magali Cunha was mentioning during the session yesterday. First of all, in the manifesto, fake news and digital campaigns with political motivations that are undermining democratic processes and also responsible journalism. We can see this happening very especially in Latin America and the Caribbean, where economic and political fundamentalism are becoming more and more important and creating a climate of insecurity in democratic contexts that are already weakened. This is why we would like to underline the values for democracy, of respect and equality, and we would like to add to this equality for sexual freedom, religious belief, and culture. This is very important in the context of our region, where the agenda of feminist groups is very strong, and they are achieving a new way, a new proposal for a way to do politics in our region. The proposals that we can make, the contributions related to digital justice and social justice, is creating new spaces for capacity development and the promotion of resources to assist this training in the most vulnerable communities worldwide. It is very important to raise awareness that faith communities are needed as a reference and as a space where voices can be heard and where values of love and compassion can counteract hate speeches. Regarding the idea of the public space and the growing public space, we need to be able to cater for the needs of the most vulnerable communities of our times with a prophetic voice against the hegemonic powers of our times who intend to monopolize every narrative. And these are just some of our views for the future. We believe in the creation of new digital spaces and platforms with similar formats that are able to welcome religious beliefs, cultures, and worldviews, and where people are not a mere product, but something alive that brings values into our communities. We would like to be able to share our witness in different ways, not only by giving information, but really by communicating and trying to challenge those values that are not in line with our humanity. We believe that our hermeneutics or biblical interpretation, biblical understanding is important to support the loving practice of our faith communities. We also believe, as Dr. Magali Cunha was saying, that it is necessary to openly fight against fundamentalism in the world and its impact by strengthening democracy and fighting against hate speeches, to support the humanity
in its plurality of practices and freedom of thought and expression. I would also like to remind that the Bible and the books that form the Bible are not just a recommendation to say what is true or what is not. This is not the intention of the biblical text, but the Bible does show the contradiction between what is apparent and the revealed truth. So we have a world that makes some lies be seen as vulnerable, but historically, the Bible denounces this death and the powers that cause this destruction. And this is still relevant in the context where lives are still abused and violated in our world. So we hope that this will help us practice the gospel in our times. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for the presentation and the reflection from your region and from your perspective. We'd now like to go to the next speaker who will come to us. The next speaker is Julan Clark Morris, who is the managing editor of the Media and Communications Office of the Anglican Church at Aotearoa, New Zealand in Polynesia, supporting English medium communications across the church, including supporting news and features writing for the Marae, the indigenous community. Affiliated with the Anglican Church and Anglican churches in Fiji, Tonga, and Samoa, New Zealand, and also Polynesia. So you are welcome to share this space. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
We can hear you fine. The volume may be a little low, but we can adjust on our end as well, I think.
So I want to start with congratulating the drafters on their excellent work on this document. I think that the manifesto as it stands is an engaging and comprehensive, well-crafted text that reflects the spirit of the presentations, the case studies, and the conversations I have heard over the last 3 days. So well done. I was asked to look at it closely, and so I have. So I'll just share some of what I have found in the document that I think I can augment from the Asia Pacific perspective. To people who are rapporteurs, just relax. I have everything written in the document that I will send to you. So I wanted to start off by just adding a few bits and pieces to the text in the beginning where it describes the global context. It talks about the positive aspects of the technologies, and there I wanted to add, as well as to communicate and advocate, that we use the technology to inform ourselves and to navigate our world. And that I was thinking particularly of the way apps that we've been talking about have also been used by refugees to share safe routes across conflict situations with each other when they are getting out of the countries they're fleeing from. When you talked about the algorithms that were being developed according to subjective criteria, you talked about the lingering effects of colonialism. And I do need to say that in the Asia Pacific region, it would need to be the ongoing effects of colonization, racism, and systemic power imbalances, because they're very real and they are a right now situation over here. And they are an unresolved, colonization is an utterly unresolved issue here in terms of social justice. When I was in your theological perspective section, and you talked about being called to participate in God's mission to ensure that all that may have life and have it abundantly from John 10:10. I felt that in that sentence we could add, and that applies no less to human actions and living in the digital sphere. Under issues and challenges, being an editor, I'm very keen on concrete statements. So when you talked about ecological concerns, I wondered if it would be a good idea to name some ecological concerns, including the resource use of mined, minerals, and the effect of mining, about the issues of planned obsolescence of digital technology, which is shocking and gets dumped in Asia a lot. And also the waste issue around planned obsolescence of digital technologies, as well as the other ecological concerns about reduction of human relationships with the earth, with the natural world, because of the shift of energy and resources into the digital realm. Also in your issues and challenges section, I had a couple of ways of switching the direction to be more positive, away from negative framing of some of the challenges to positive framing. So in our discussion, we had a talk about the new platforms that might emerge that have an ethical basis. And so in your section where you have dot points, I wondered about having in our sort of ideal world digital platforms, something that openly names and promotes the people-centered values that drive the platform. And instead of saying in your missing, ignored, silenced voices, I wanted to seek to include rather than the way it was named in the document. And also that could be changed to say the platform encourages and celebrates diverse voices and magnifies the voice of small players. We had a conversation with the participant in our Asia Pacific region from Australia, who was talking about the problems with deleting data, which is mentioned in this document, the problems with deleting data when people delete data related to criminal activity. And he was talking specifically about human trafficking and pornography, and the need for those things to be accessible for policing. And I also made a change where you said we rejected the dangers of the harmful activities in the dark net. And I thought perhaps a more proactive approach to that, because we reject the dangers, to me is sort of like we love apple pie. Perhaps we could actually say we support digital interventions that help societies to eradicate these activities, which is a more proactive front foot on that. But where I made the most suggestions was in the final section, where I added some dot points. If I have enough time, I could share those with you, to offer concrete suggestions towards the program that people might think are viable actions to take when we leave the symposium, and actions for us to suggest to our churches, our development organisations, our movements when we get back to our own contexts. And these were that alongside what you've already suggested, that we will work with civil society actors, development organisations, faith groups and governments to encourage policies and education that lead to the creation of spaces and channels that are inclusive, interactive, participatory, promote digital justice, expand public space and create visions for the future. Then I thought as Christians, we will encourage theological and ethical critiques of the hidden powers that operate unregulated, commercially driven digital spaces. Then I thought another practical output would be we will share our learnings from this symposium in our own media, journalistic, technological development, social movement and faith contexts to spread the seeds of a grassroots faith-inspired resistance to the forces challenging human dignity and flourishing in the digital realm. So that was just concretizing something that was already in the document with the actions. And we will support people on the margins of the digital world by creating intentional space for their voices and any new platforms or technological responses we're part of creating as churches or coalitions of civil society actors. And
thank you so much. I'm afraid we're losing time at this point, but we're very grateful for all your interventions. Can you wrap up just very quickly?
I'll give the last one, which was actually the most important thing in our region, which was to strongly support us to lobby governments and funding partners to support programs that increase marginalised people's access to digital hardware, software, internet connectivity, and electrical supply solutions that can help close the digital divide.
Thank you so much. And of course, I believe you have the email address to send the written feedback that you have so that we can have it carefully, but also to say we are recording the presentations. So we also have the recording. Just to say to everyone to be reminded that we're not editing the document at this point. We're wanting to know what the problems are, the substantive problems and challenges are, as well as what is missing in the document. So just for all, when you're responding as well, especially when we get to the Q&A, if you can keep that in mind, that would be very helpful to the process. Okay, without further ado, it's time to hear from our third speaker, who will come with the regional perspective as well. We welcome Fanny Hieu Phan Chong, who is the Asia Pacific Regional Coordinator of the World Student Christian Federation. So welcome, the space is yours.
Okay, thank you. I hope you can listen me well.
Yes, we hear you fine, thank you.
Good, good. I think I don't have much to add on the manifesto. Everything on there, I think we covered in the three days. So maybe I will just give a very brief reflection after I read the documents. So first of all, it was a very good initiative from WCC to hold this symposium on the theme of communication for social justice in the digital age. It is a very important agenda for us to discuss, especially we are undergoing the COVID-19 pandemic. And then we are all experiencing in different level of communication with different social media and different communication platforms. It do bring us a very convenient way of interaction, connecting different people from different backgrounds, like us, what we are doing, from different time zone. I do feel a kind of closeness, but actually we are geographically far from each other. But however, this kind of convenience also bring distance to people. By using this convenience, distancing people with hate speeches and fake news, netizens comments without responsibilities on the internet, and the cancel culture is actually spreading everywhere, especially where I'm based now in Seoul and where I'm coming from in Hong Kong. I saw this also happen to many of the young people and the students. Since I'm working with the World Student Christian Federation, I engage with quite a lot of the young people and students. They are the ones who know very well how to use the online platforms, and they are used to use this kind of online platform to communicate, and then they are responding every second. And then they are very interactive, responsive, but come into meeting people in person, they are very much hesitated. So these 3 days, I think we have been listening from many speakers and from the participants as well. So I have some highlights. I don't know whether is that reflected in the manifesto. I hope it's somehow somewhere there. So some speakers, I'm quite impressed by their speeches, but I'm not quoting exactly the same wordings from them, but I'm trying to use my word. No matter how good the technology we are enjoying for communication and interaction, meeting people in person is still the base and the foundation for us to build trust. When the trust is built, the online platforms will be used justly. We cannot over-rely on the virtual space, though it brings us many convenience. But otherwise, we are creating an extreme individualism that doesn't help to bring people close and in solidarity. I don't think I have much time to talk, but many things we need to do after that, after this symposium, as most of us coming from a faith-based groups and organization. Don't forget, we are called to journey of justice and peace, not only on the real world, but we should put more attention on the virtual world as too. Thank you.
And thank you very much. We certainly appreciate your regional perspectives and certainly the generational perspectives that you're offering as well. So we have a few comments in the chat. I hope people have been following the chat. If there's anyone who has written in the chat who wants to briefly summarize your inquiry, we can take things verbally. I cannot see your hands as well as I'd like, but perhaps we can give this a whirl. I'll try to change my view, so perhaps I can see your hands a bit better. But those who've written in the chat, this is your time very briefly to speak into what you may have put into the chat. And then we're going to go into our team who will respond to some of the interventions that have been made. So who would like to go first, who's already written in the chat very quickly to summarize verbally what you may have put there? I don't see a hand of the ones who've written in the chat, and I don't hear your voice. Can you raise your hand or lift your voice? Well, it would appear then those who have written in the chat are content to leave it there. Please know that the chats will be reviewed closely, just as the recording will be as well. Are there others who would like to offer a comment or a clarification relative to the document, perhaps affirmations or further points that may be missing or that need to be revisited? Please, this is your moment to speak briefly into this moment. I think I see a Mr. Imbert Charles who has lifted his hand. Please, Mr. Charles, go right ahead.
Hi, good day, everyone. I think lots of work has been done so far on the manifesto. Just some observations. I think one, that the manifesto hopefully should resonate globally because of the nature of and importance of the issues. Hence, I think some work has to be done on ensuring that the language and some of the keywords resonate with audiences and with some of the institutions all over the world, particularly the South, the global South. Secondly, I think the emphasis on digitization is very important. However, we have to be mindful not to exclude other language that's can connect other people who are unfamiliar with the lexicon of digitization. So, that has to be taken into consideration in the formulation of the manifesto. Because words matter.
Thank you very much for that intervention. We also want to make sure it is known, and they are on the screen, Dr. Stephen Brown, and of course, Ms. Lynn Van Ruin, who is with our Communications Department of World Council of Churches, who are listening intently. I think I saw where Ms. Lynn Van Ruin wanted to speak a moment into this space, and then others, please be ready to do so as well. Please, Lynn, go right ahead.
Thank you so much. I think the first thing that I would like to emphasize is that we very soon realized when we started working on this that we can't include all the actions that are the output and the future of this program in a manifesto. We thought that it would be make the document unwieldy. But that doesn't mean that this is not important. So all the actions we have collected to date are still recorded. We have all your comments from the discussions group, but also this afternoon, many of the comments were about the action plan. And that's the next document we will be working on. So we think this deserves focus and attention, and we will definitely not lose that very important point.
And thank you very much for that observation. I don't know, Dr. Brown, did you want to add something else at this moment? And then we'll see if there are other interventions. Dr. Brown, did you want to offer up any other comments as well at this moment? I'm afraid you're muted, I think.
Yes, I'd like to. There's a few areas that I'd like to comment on. How we speak in a way that is globally and locally appropriate is one of the most difficult things that we were wrestling with as an editorial team, because on the one hand we wanted it's a global document that comes out of a global symposium, but also has to speak to local situations in the relevant and the appropriate language, and that's quite a difficult thing to hold together. And so if there are comments and ideas that can be fed into this after the symposium as we're looking to a revision, that would be really helpful. The other thing that I wanted to raise, which was sparked off by some of the comments, maybe not a direct answer to them, was the whole issue of the digital tools that we use. It came up in one of the sessions earlier today when we talked about how can we try and combat the global hegemony of big tech when de facto we use the tools that they provide because those are de facto the most widely spread and accessible. And I wonder if one of the areas for the ecumenical community might be to seek to develop tools for collaborative work together digitally, which would then not be dependent on big tech like Google or other companies, but would offer much of the same functionality, but where we didn't feel that the data that we were using was going into some kind of data mining. And the last thing I wanted to highlight was what Lynn mentioned about the program of actions. As I said in my introduction at the beginning, we hope very much this symposium isn't the end, but the beginning of a process. And we hope that with the manifesto, which sets out the principles, we can work together to look at a program of actions that we can undertake at global, regional, and local levels. So again, next week when we send out the latest version of the manifesto, we'll also be making some suggestions about how together, globally, we can look to develop a program of action together.
Thank you very much for your intervention as well. I believe I saw the hand of M. Kocher. Did you want to speak in this moment as well? M. Kocher, I'm afraid I don't know the first name from your title. Well, it appears that if the person doesn't want to speak. Are there any others, especially those who've written in the chat, who would like to offer any verbal interventions in this moment? This is your moment to please speak relative to the manifesto and the way forward. Are there any others? I'm very interested to know how to read silence. I don't just take silence for granted. I'm assuming that silence means that the document is moving in a way that can be received. If there are those who do not feel it is moving in a direction where it can be received for you to use and for you to share, this is your moment to please speak. And I think Mr. M. Culture is now ready to speak. Go ahead, please. M. Culture, please go ahead.
Oui, je vais parler en français. Tout d'abord pour remercier infiniment les traducteurs.
Thank the interpreter who has been working and interpreting into French since this morning. Very interesting debate. I don't have any objection on the document. It's comprehensive, interesting, but it's not enough in the sense that we are overloaded by too many documents, too many declarations, and not enough actions, especially in this digital world. For us to grab that word, we have to be in tune with that word, to work digitally in a different way, meaning not using the software from the GAFAs, but maybe to have new means to develop a digital culture, a digital network, so that we can be different as believers and to be together. And I think one of the main challenges is the development of algorithms that would be the expressions of the traditions that we come from, and that's a really long haul, but I'm convinced that's the way to go. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your intervention. I think this is a point well taken, that not only do we want the written word or the document, but how does it come to life? What are the strategies relative to using the digital tools to help it come to life? And so that's what I hear you saying. How do we create that kind of presentation strategy that may make use of digital tools and other communicative methods, so that it comes to life in some ways for different regions to grab hold of? And I would say that that would be the case when we regionalize what the document may be presenting as a manifesto. So again, the animation of the manifesto, and then how does it live in the cultural communities, and where might there be platforms to share whereby these regionalizations of the approaches of the manifesto are taking its life and its shape. Thank you very much. Mr. M. Culture has one more comment, and I don't see another hand, so I'm going to take it, and then we're going to move along. M. Culture, please go ahead. Okay, apologies. We're not able to hear from him again, but I do think the points that we've heard are very helpful. Again, this is the last moment. We are coming toward the end of our time together. Might there be any other quick interventions that would like to be added at this time? I'm not seeing any hands at the moment, but this is your time. Okay, not seeing any other hands, I'm going to ask for some wrap-up comments from Ms. Van Ruin and Dr. Brown as to the way forward. The chat again will be used, the recording will be used. Of course, any written recommendations will be resourced as well. So let's have a final word from our representatives from the committee, And then let's move along to the next item on the agenda. Thank you very much to all the speakers and to everyone who has offered interventions in the chat or verbally. So over to you, Ms. Van Ruin, please, and then Dr. Brown.
Thank you so much. Just to repeat what is in the chat already, that we would really appreciate your input. This version that was read today should be in your email inbox already. And it is also available online. And we appreciate all your reactions, comments, and contributions until 9 o'clock on Sunday evening. And we hope to have a next version of this with you soon thereafter. As I mentioned, we will also be collating and collection any action points. You are welcome to also add those to your feedback.
Thank you, and thank you for your work on this manifesto. Dr. Brown, any wrap-up comments as well?
To thank everybody for the very rich comments today in this session, in the other sessions, in the time throughout the symposium, because really the idea is that the manifesto comes out of this symposium, and it's a very, very different situation to draft a draft manifesto sitting in the office or working from home with 2 or 3 other people, and to develop a document, a manifesto that comes out of a living meeting like this. So I'm really, really very grateful for all of the contributions. I think looking forward, one of the things to think about as well is not just to think about how we can distribute the manifesto as either as a piece of paper or as an online PDF, but how we can use other digital tools to raise the issues that the manifesto focuses on. So I think it's there to be a starting point and to be used. I was very excited about the idea of talking about regionalization, and I think that we can maybe look together at points for the future where we can work together, because it's one thing to talk about these issues in a symposium such as this, and it's another one to try and have real direct points and aims where we're seeking to work together on specific projects, programs, and advocacy. So really all I've got to say is thank you. I've learned a lot in this symposium, and it's been a great experience, and we really want to take all of your comments and your input into the manifesto, but not just into the manifesto, but into the what you might call the ecumenical digital movement as it looks forward. So thank you very much.
And thank you, Dr. Brown, again, to both of you for your key role in helping to put together the manifesto. And of course, to all of the team that has been working, and to all of you for your inputs over these few days in which we've had contributions. Now we want to move to the closing agenda items for today that will close out our symposium. We are delighted that the moderator of the World Council of Churches, Dr. Agnes Aboom, who hails from Kenya, will be giving us a closing sending. And then I will come back to you with a closing prayer and some music, hopefully to animate a few of my closing comments in the devotional time as well. So let us go over to Dr. Agnes Aboom, our moderator, who will come to us with a closing sending. Thank you.
Thank you to all of you for your participation in this symposium on communication for social justice in a digital age. This topic is recent, urgent, and multidimensional. So your input from a variety of disciplines, social contexts, and points of view enable us to bring the whole subject of social justice in the digital field into perspective. I offer a special thanks to our sponsors in this enterprise, namely the World Association for Christian Communication, which has long championed these issues and a deeper understanding of what it is what is at stake in digital justice. We owe a debt of thanks to our partners at Bread for the World, the Evangelical Church of Germany, EKD, Evangelische Mission Weltfeld, EMW, and the World Student Christian Federation, which have co-organized the conference. The symposium has brought together research experiences from different regions and communities, expert input, and ethical and theological reflection, all the interests of building a vision of a more just digital and human society and actions to make that happen. As Tijana Petkovic recently wrote, we need a deeper, theologically informed, interdisciplinary engagement about new understandings of technology and how technology might contribute to human flourishing. Mentioning theology hints at the profound values at stake in our digital communication. The long-standing concern in the ecumenical world about modern communication and technology has been highlighted and even more sharpened by the pandemic and the need to go virtual in our organizations, businesses, churches, and families. Though fascinating in itself, it is less the intrinsic interest of digital communication and more its pervasive presence in our lives that spurs our many-sided concerns and reflections. That is why I so appreciated the conference organizers' division of the topic into different arenas of access and equity, digital justice, public and social media, public space, and constructive frameworks, vision for the future. I look forward to learning more from the insights in the papers and discussions that have been presented at this symposium. For my part, and from the vantage point of my own work with churches in Africa and elsewhere, I have seen churches and church organizations rapidly embrace digital technology during the pandemic in order to keep in touch with their congregations and to sustain the fellowship during the pandemic. Youth have played a pivotal role assisting clergy and church workers to use technology in their ministry, as well as accompanying them in pastoral ministry. In fact, digital communication has broadened the reach of the churches and health agencies, enabling their voices to be heard in boardrooms of decision makers and the powerful, as well as in the homes where spiritual solace and reassurance were desperately needed. But of course, alongside its potential for building human community, we also see a more problematic side of these developments. We note that substantial portions of the world's populace is denied these benefits. We observe some social media displacing real personal ties, even as they invade privacy. We see some public media mocking objectivity by bending coverage to suit their own ideological or racist, or for that matter, xenophobic agendas and markets. And we see manipulation of media by leaders and governments for their own personal or political gains. Digital media, in and of itself, and its use are not unalloyed good news. That is why I so appreciate and affirm your careful reflection on the whole range of practical, theoretical, ethical, and theological issues. As you know, our flagship journal, the Ecumenical Review, has devoted space to parsing the publications of digital developments. And the most recent meeting of the WCC Central Committee explicitly requested a position paper on them. Indeed, the topic has been solidly incorporated into plans for our 11th General Assembly 2022 in Karlsruhe, Germany. So we are very hopeful that your work here will help us understand this vast area, discern the values that can be nurtured there, and identify opportunities for action at the Assembly and beyond. May your work enlighten and inspire our work together for social justice in our digital age. Thank you very much for listening.
I am sure you join me in thanking our moderator of the World Council of Churches in her substantive closing remarks that send us on our way. May I further add that in the chat is the email address for which you can make further comments. Please download the chat and particularly the email addresses and resource information about how you can follow up with your comments and your suggestions. And now we've come to the time of our closing prayer, but not without another word of thanks to everyone, to all of the working team, some of who you may not have seen, who've been working, to all of the partners that our moderator has already named, to you who have been participating in the symposium, all of the presenters, all the regional groups, all of the rapporteurs, all of those who have made this symposium possible. We thank God for you and for what we will yet do together. God bless you for your great labors together. Let us close now with a closing prayer time, and I will bring it to you in just a moment. Please prepare your hearts and minds for a closing prayer reflection. And this prayer reflection is based on prayers by Mr. Mike Bickle, but I have taken some liberties here to revise it accordingly for this moment as well. But certainly want to give credit where credit is due. Let us prepare our hearts and minds for these rubrics of prayer and reflection. The first sub-theme would be on prayers for the renewal of our minds. We pray and ask for God's heart of promoting life and justice for and with all the people and leaders creating and using digital technology. We pray for a digital space that is rooted and grounded in the sacred human identity of being made in the image of God. We pray that God would renew the minds of all engaged in digital communications to be led by the Spirit, which promotes life and peace, and to have a good spirit of wisdom and revelation in their decision-making that impacts billions of people. And prayer for restoration. We pray for God to help us to write a redemption story for digital use that disciples the nations and the lands with love, mutual regard for human dignity, and creation care. We pray the gospel, Matthew 7:17, for all in the digital industry to be healed and delivered from anything that is not of God, to become healthy trees producing good fruit and building and using digital technology that brings glory to God and all people in creation. A prayer for love and beauty. We pray for all in the digital work to be perfected in love, as stated in 1 John 4:18, and beauty, and thereby walk in our calling and destiny by God's power, Ephesians 1:17 and 19. A prayer for discernment. We pray for discernment to grow, Hebrews 5:14. We affirm our responsibility to not call evil good and good evil, to not put darkness for light and light for darkness, and to not put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Prayer for humility and wisdom. We pray for those in the digital space to embrace and live in the truth of humility that commends wisdom and revelation for the common good for and with all. And then finally, a prayer for fruits of the Spirit as a virtuous call to action. May the use of digital resources be used to spread the fruits of the Spirit, including love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and yes, self-control. John 1:3 and Galatians 5:22-23. And now it is my pleasure and my delight to close with a song written by the African-American group in the United States, the Stylistics, written in 1972 with the renowned, quote, Philadelphia sound that speaks into the theme of human dignity and agency. But in this case, performed here more recently in 2020 by relatively new talent, Candace Springs, and the jazz great David Sanborn in New York City. Here you go with a new rendition of People Make the World Go Round. God bless you. And again, thank you for joining us in this time together.